Welcome, everyone, to Sports Shorts Daily, presented by LeBear's Casino in Baton Rouge. Ronnie Rance alongside Playboy Marty. Hope everybody's having a great morning. Our special guest today, Tiger Bait publisher and recruiting analyst for over 20 years, Mike Scarborough of TigerBait.com. How are you, big guy?
Doing good. It's trying to find our way with this whole COVID lockdown, and it's like making my rounds around all the high schools in the afternoons. To if they're just lifting weights, then that's what I'm gonna pay attention to. But trying to get around to see local athletes, just in case there's a possibility we won't get to see them until next year.
Mike, I got to ask you, it's shocking to me that during this time of COVID and this time of all these rules and regulations and people not being able to, go on campuses and see people play, that LSU's just plugging along and recruiting as if nothing ever happened. And quite honestly, I want to get your opinion. I got to believe LSU, the SEC in general, got a bump last week when the Big Ten and the Pac-12 decided early to not play football this year.
Yeah, that's all I've been thinking about, was that if the SEC and Big 12 and ACC hold course, and those other two leagues are sitting on the sidelines, and the three leagues that do pull it off, what a recruiting advantage that's going to be throughout the fall when that's the only game on television, come the fall. And so I think, look, first of all, LSU is still, the national champion. And I think with all the lockdowns, the fact there was no high school evaluation period, there were no June camps, there have been no on-campus visits. And when you've got a staff like LSU's that works as hard as they do, I don't know if they've charted it. I haven't talked to anybody over there to tell me, yeah, this is typically the number of hours we put in each day this time of year, and now we're doing this. But I've got to believe it's considerably more. I'd be shocked if it isn't 30 or 40% more, the amount of time that they're dedicating to the Zoom calls. And look, they're using Zoom and all the other formats with kids sending them in their own workout videos, and they're encouraging it. They're using that as a way to try and evaluate, because what else do they have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's funny because basketball players used to get made fun of for having like Instagram highlight tapes, but that's actually turning out to be pretty helpful now. But I just want to say, like, how dumb does the Pac-12 and Big Ten look now that like we've had a schedule roll out and like things seem to be going? I think the longer this goes, just the dumber they're going to keep looking.
Yeah, I tweeted last night, one of Clay Travis, of course, I think it seems he's the lone national media guy that's out there fighting the fight against what he calls the Corona bros nationally. And I retweeted one of his things, and I said, the Big Ten's commissioner's approval ratings is about as low as scurvy and leprosy. And it's, but what are they going to do if the SEC pulls it off? I mean, do they just sit in the weeds and wait for the SEC to fall on their face and have a bunch of COVID cases and have to have game cancellations, or I don't think they're hoping for a train wreck. But when you see these parents at every school of football players with these petitions, man, I mean, how does that Big Ten commissioner go to any on-campus site and away from the stands or be greeted? I mean, he's like Roger Goodell when he comes to town.
I got to tell you, Mike, though, even though there's no question, in my opinion, and I've said this all along, that Pac-12 and the Big Ten pulled the plug too soon, I do think, and this is just Ronnie Rance's opinion, I do think they're going to be right. I don't think there is going to be football. Let me show you an example. University of North Carolina. I don't know off the top of my head how many students the University of North Carolina has. Let's just say it's similar to LSU and call it 30,000. Well, they had just over 100 cases of COVID and they decided to go remote with their education and to not allow students on campus, send everybody home. If that's less than 1%. If only 120 cases, when you've got over 30,000 students, all that does is, if that's all it takes to shut down a campus and a university, then everybody's going to be in that same boat. And if that's our appetite, then I can't imagine that we're going to see this through a month and a half from now and have fans and football.
Yeah, and I still think, though, let's say if you're right and the season does get canceled because of a wave like that, from a recruiting perspective, I still think the SEC and the other conferences that tried to stay the course,
I agree,
and fight the fight, I still think they're winners. Because they showed the athletes that they were going to stick it out as long as they could and try to make a go of it. And I think those other leagues look like, whether it's fair or not to those athletes, I think a lot of those athletes internalize it as their administrators and presidents and so forth abandon them.
Well, my thoughts on the Carolina thing is, like, if they're doing all things remote and there's no students on campus, doesn't that make it a better environment for them to be able to play?
No, it does. And at the moment, the ACC and North Carolina are still moving forward with football, right?
Yeah.
They're still saying that that's going to happen. But, it's a domino type deal. I mean, the first thing that has to happen for there not to be football at any of these big conferences, Big 12, SEC, ACC, that are right now moving forward, is you got to not have play people on campus. If you have a pandemic outbreak on campus, that's the first domino to fall. And it hasn't fallen yet that ACC or North Carolina said we're not going to play football. But this, to me, if this is already happening, I mean, they've been on campus, a week? It's so quick. And
but that's also why they decided to start the season late, because they were calculating that there would be a massive outbreak once everybody converged on the campus, and they were hoping to be able to get through it. So, and if you're Scott Woodward and you're interim LSU president, and you're looking at, let's say the LSU has a similar outbreak. Well, what are you doing with your LSU football players? What bubble are they in? Have they been in those classes? How many classes with the normal student body are the LSU football players in with each day? Can they weather the storm if they say, okay, we're going, if they actually did like North Carolina and did it entirely, based online school, you can still have a football season as long as you're not having 30 or 40% of your football team test positive.
So you're thinking that we're likely to see is the North Carolina model or example where they send all the students home, tell everybody to take all the classes online, but still have athletics in the fall for those fall sports. They're just going to be more in a bubble on campus because no one else is going to be there.
I think they're already in a bubble.
West Campus apartment space.
Yeah, how often do they venture out? I mean, I've thought all along too. How many of these football players? I mean, what kind of discussions are? How many of those guys have are in long-term relationships, and it really doesn't matter what's long-term or short-term. But I mean, what's the discussion been about? Dating and to me, that's the big concern. And I heard Nick Saban on Get Up this morning talking about. That's the big deal. Once they leave the building, what are they doing in the evening? Well, do they want to go to dinner with a girlfriend? Do they want to, old high school classmates that also attend LSU? That's where the trouble starts. And if they try to convince these football players that they almost need to, be monks and insulate themselves for 3 months until it's over with, and then, let it fly in the off season.
Visiting with Mike Scarborough of TigerBait.com. Let's talk a little recruiting. That's what you've been doing for over 20 years at TigerBait.com. Coach O tweeted out, hold that tiger. That means on Twitter. That always means, or actually, Derek Panamsky tweeted out. I want to make sure we clarify that, not Coach O. But Lucas Taylor, another commitment. Tell us about Lucas Taylor, the verbal commitment yesterday that LSU got.
Yeah, we've done probably the most stories on Lucas in the last 5 or 6 months, and I knew Coach Craig really liked him. Of course, he's been out to St. Paul's many times in the last several years. They were recruiting one of Lucas's classmates last year that ended up at Arkansas, the LSU legacy. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a 6'4", 310-pound, 4-star offensive lineman. So you've already got the #1 recruiting class in the country right now, regardless of what service rankings you look at. And the offensive line group, for the class of 22 is exceptional. You got Emory Jones at Kappa Chi here in Baton Rouge. And then you got Will Campbell up at Neville, who's absolutely fantastic. So you got two great ones in the state of Louisiana, and you've got one already committed for a total of 7 for the class of 22. So, James Craig's going to have a little bit easier job for 22 than 21, where he's got to go entirely out of state for offensive linemen.
Let me ask you this, Mike. So you've been doing this for a long time. What's the biggest difference between the Miles era at its peak and the Orgeron era at its current peak in terms of recruiting tactics and basically how they were able to get it done?
I think the biggest thing is when Ed Orgeron said we're going to recruit nationally, he meant it. And, Les Miles and his staff, I mean, look, I would constantly check in the box on profiles of recruits from across the country that had received LSU offers. But simply sending a letter or letting his coach know that the player has an offer and the kid tweeting out an offer, that's one thing. It's the willingness to actually hit the road and go to that school. Of course, it's different now under COVID. But when you see the Miles that Craig and Bush and Corey Raymond's always gone to Florida, but the actual, I would love to see the travel budget before COVID for the staff under Ed Orgeron versus Les Miles. I remember, I want to say it was a linebacker in North Carolina, and this was probably in May of whatever year it was. And I ran into John Chavis waiting for a camp to start at LSU. And I said, man, I talked to so-and-so the other day. He really loves LSU. And his reply was, yeah, we'll see if we can get to him. Well, because back in those days, Les Miles, it might be that guy was really high on John Chavis's board. But between Miles being real funny about letting his coaches go out in September and October, depending on who the opponent was on a Saturday, flying up to North Carolina for, let's say they were playing Atlanta in a kickoff classic or something. They just couldn't get to him. If the kid didn't have the means to make it to a June camp, which this kid, I don't believe, did that year. But that's the whole point. I mean, we've seen where, Bush has been in Arizona many times in the last couple of years. That's why he's such a great recruiter and possibly the best recruiter on the staff. I think that's the biggest difference, to get back to it, is their willingness. When they say they're recruiting nationally, they're logging the miles. Of course, it's different now, like I said, with COVID. But look, so you've got great coaches, your position coaches that are great recruiters. Then you've got guys in the building like Jeff Martin, Colin D'Angelo, Christian Locatour, who I've been talking about for the last 2 years, behind the scenes doing such a fantastic job with linemen. Every time I talk to a defensive lineman, they love Christian Locatour. And of course, he's not much older than them. I mean, He was just playing, like 3-4 years ago. Yeah. So he relates to him. And then you got Ed Orgeron. I mean, I was when Walker Howard was, I was filming his commitment video in Lafayette, and we were in between doing some takes, and all of a sudden here comes, he's Ed Orgeron's they're doing FaceTime. And so you combine what you've got in the building, your non-assistant coaches, your assistant coaches, how tenacious they are. And then you've got Ed Orgeron, who lives for recruiting. He's making Zoom calls, FaceTime all day long. And so I think that's why LSU is at a big advantage, particularly this year under COVID, because you had one of the greatest, if not the greatest, college football season in history. And they're able to really exploit it like no other team has been able to, because there's been nothing else going on.
Mm-hmm.
Final question for you, Mike. Give us a little insight on this thing. I know LSU fans initially are kind of freaking out that Kerry Vincent decided to opt out and just start preparing for pro football, not going to play his final season at LSU. Of course, second on the team last year in interceptions, and they're starting nickelback. What's the real reason why Kerry Vincent's not back for LSU?
Look, you hate to, look, I know last November, December, when LSU was undefeated and the talk started saying, like, is this kid going to go? And, then all of a sudden in December, Patrick Queen became a guy that was going to go. And we were hearing that Kerry Vincent was mulling it over at that point. And a lot of people said, well, look, he's undersized. He really needs to come back. But, the thing about a guy like Kerry Vincent, it's not like all of a sudden he's going to get taller and bigger in his age.
Right.
He is what he is. I don't know if he, and like I said, I don't know the real reason.
Yeah, there's got to be some more to the story, right? There's got to be.
Maybe he was regretting not going out last year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's seeing his role is different in a Bo Pelini defense than it was in a Dave Aranda defense. He's looking at Cordell Flott and Jay Ward and other freshmen that are coming up behind him. And, who knows? Or maybe it is absolutely legit that he is, and I'll take him at face value on that he's fearful of COVID, and he's just going to start preparing for the NFL draft. But my point is let's say the season does get uncorked and they play 3 or 4 games. Do you have guys, let's say LSU loses to Florida. Do some kids all of a sudden say, well, this season's I'm gonna pack it in this age of COVID?
I think they will. I think that will happen. We've seen it happen on good teams with the great players. In this weird year, I do think in college football, you're going to see a number of players get a couple of games in, get a little tape, especially if they play well, get a little tape and then, say, yeah, I'm going to shut it down.
But is that only going to be your juniors and seniors that do that? I mean, do you have an underclassman that tries to do that thinking he's going to come back and play next year?
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah.
Mike, thanks so much, buddy, for your time. Tell the folks how they can get, more from TigerBait.com.
Well, that's it. Just go to TigerBait.com. We always give you a 1-week trial period for $1. And like I always say, do yourself a favor. Choose the annual package. With that one, you're basically getting 3 months for free. And we're absolutely loaded with new content every day. And if you're an LSU fan, we want to have you.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Stay safe. Playboy Marty, I'm Ronnie Rance. Check us out, Sports Shorts Daily. Like, share, subscribe on our YouTube page each and every weekday for about 15 minutes every morning. We do Sports Shorts Daily presented by LeBear's Casino. Have a great day, everybody.